Chapter 111. Identity Exposed. Oh, his brother is. Kang Qian was instantly curious. It's Shen Taji, the crazy warrior of the 7 great Tang warriors. Yun Shuiru, who was on the side, said with a grave expression. Shen Taji. Kang Qian couldn't help but reveal a hint of surprise in his gaze as he heard the words. His sight couldn't help but look towards that Shen Tafeng, who was walking from afar. This person was actually Shen Taji's older brother. It was really surprising, but this older brother's strength was far worse than his younger brother. Kang Qian couldn't help but think back to the 3 swords that Shen Taji had performed at the Fengdu martial arts arena. One sword was more powerful than the other, especially the last one. It wasn't much worse than the broken sky that he had created. Speaking of which, amongst the 7 heroes of the great Tang dynasty, the only ones Kang Qian really cared about were this crazy hero, Shen Taji, and the natural thunder body of crazy hero, Lei Yun. Although the others had good qualifications, they were still some distance behind Kang Qian, and only Shen Taji and Lei Yun had strong potential to catch up with Kang Qian. First of all, Lei Yun was born with a thunder body. His achievements need not be mentioned. People with this special bloodline. In the future, there will be a place for him in the cultivation world. Kang Qian has never underestimated him. As for Shen Taji, Kang Qian does not know much, but that light clouds of 3 moves of the sword of the world will be enough to let people dare not underestimate him. This mad warrior, Shen Taji, possessed a mysterious and unpredictable strength and heritage, and the Heavenly Dao Sect's disciple acceptance ceremony in half a year might be a strong opponent for him. Hey, look, Shen Tafeng went to the Yun family. This is a good show. I heard that Shen Tafeng had pursued Yun Shuiru, but unfortunately he was rejected. I'm afraid he won't feel good this time when he sees a youth hiding in Yun Shuiru's carriage. I have some sympathy for that youth, facing Shen Tafeng's anger. What should this brat do? The surrounding crowd, watching Shen Tafeng walk towards the Yun family's carriage, all had gloating looks in their gazes. The Yun family's crowd all had ugly faces. Of course, they weren't worried about Kang Qian's safety. After all, the strength Kang Qian had displayed was enough to resist an 8th level Jiden stage powerhouse. However, after all, Shen Tafeng was the young master of the Shen Ta family, representing the first great family of Demon Yuan City, the Shen Ta family. To be honest, the Yun family had already crossed swords with the Zhong family, so naturally, they did not dare to go against the Shen Ta family again. After all, the strength of the Shen Ta family was too terrifying. What's more, the Shen Ta family still had a terrifying youth like Shen Taji, although this fellow was a bit delirious, but with his natural talent, he would definitely be a renowned peerless powerhouse in the future. Under these circumstances, even some of the great clans in the imperial capital wouldn't dare to befriend the Shen Ta family. Shen Tafeng. This is interesting. Not far away under a giant tree, amongst the Zhou family's group of horses, there was a blue-clothed youth with a playful face watching Shen Tafeng step by step towards the Yun family. He was the Zhou family's young master Zhou Yunji, who had long since formed a 7 transformation Violet Dan, second only to the great Tang 7 amongst the younger generation. It was also because of his existence that the Zhou family's aura was becoming more and more prevalent, and had gradually approached the 3 great families of Demon Yuan City, and was secretly referred to by the crowd as the 4th great family of Demon Yuan City. Beside Zhou Yunji, Zhou Qianshu, one of the Zhou family's elders, said in a deep voice, "This youth isn't simple, you've underestimated him." His gaze was firmly fixed on Kang Qian, his expression filled with gravity. Although Kang Qian's revealed cultivation was only at the 9th level of the foundation establishment stage realm, Zhou Qianshu felt a powerful aura from Kang Qian's gaze that swept over just now, and that was definitely an aura that only an expert would possess. The youths who possessed such an aura, in Zhou Qianshu's impression, there were only a few people in Miamiao. and those people were the peak powerhouses of the young generation of the Great Tang. Even if he was such an expert of the older generation, it would be difficult for him to fight against them. Zhou Yunji sniffed. His face gave a start. Then his gaze tightened towards the pale sky, a contemplative look in his eyes. In the young generation of the Great Tang, the only young powerhouses that can make you elder. Pay so much attention to them are the 7 heroes of the Great Tang and the 4 masters of the imperial capital, right? Could this youth be Zhou Yunji narrowed his eyes. His eyes snapped shut and he said, word by word, the Great Tang 7 warriors and the imperial capital 4G have been famous for many years. This person is naturally not one of them. So this youth is most likely to be Hegemon, Kang Tian. Uncomplicated, able to guess Kang Tian's identity based on Zhou Chunshu's words. Zhou Yunji was worthy of being a rare genius of the Zhou family for 100 years. Zhou Chunshu on the side nodded appreciatively and said, Yunji, you have a point, a young strong man who can have such strength. Apart from the imperial capital 4 heroes and the Great Tang 7 warriors, it is the 3 kings of Fendu who shook the Great Tang cultivation world with their fame a year ago. But due to the corpse-catching sect sealing off the mountain for 100 years, it is naturally impossible for the Heavenly Corpse King and Earthly Corpse King to come out. Then only this hegemonic King Kangxian, who has even defeated Hegemonic Warrior and Berserk Warrior, is left. Of course, it could also be a strong person amongst the children of some hidden families. Yunji, you can see this step. You are worthy of being a rare genius of our Zhou family for 100 years. Genius, I can't even compare to the Great Tang 7. Zhou Yunji smiled mockingly at his words, then his gaze gloated at the Yun family there. If this youth was really Kang Tian, then this time Shen Tefeng had kicked the bucket. Those are all perverts. Yunji, you don't have to compare yourself to them. Zhou Chunshu didn't want to see Zhou Yunji's confidence take a hit, so he consoled. He couldn't help but secretly sigh. With Zhou Yunji's qualifications, if it was in the previous Great Tang cultivation realm, he would definitely be the pinnacle of the strongest of the young generation. But this session of the Great Tang youth generation, as if blessed by the gods, had given birth to one supreme genius after another, and could be described as the most glorious generation the Great Tang cultivation world had ever seen. And a genius like Zhou Yunji was undoubtedly very tragic in such a glorious generation, and could only serve as a supporting actor. Under a large tree opposite the Zhou family, the Zhong family's men and women were also watching the movements of the Yun family in front of them. Zhong Tianhao said, with a somewhat ugly expression on his face, this brat is even with the Yun family, Senior Wu. Didn't you say that he only saved the Yun family sisters unintentionally because he was lost? On the side, the grey-clothed old man and Zhong Kixan also looked at the Yun family's movements in the distance with gravity. Surprising indeed that Yun family's big girl is not simple. She even enlisted such a young powerhouse. There's big trouble in the competition for the water spirit fruit this time, the grey-clothed old man said with a heavy face. He also did not expect Kang Tian to come to the bean pool with the Yun family sisters. Zhong Tianhao's face was very ugly when he heard this, looking at Kang Tian with a gaze filled with jealousy and envy. The big deal is that we're going to make a move together to deal with him. I just don't believe it. Is this brat still one of the 4 emperors of the imperial capital, or the 3 kings of Fendu? Zhong Kixan sniffed coldly. You might have guessed right. This person might be the overlord of the 3 kings of Fendu. Kang Tian. The grey-clothed old man sniffed and said gruffly. What? Zhong Kixan and Zhong Tianhao were stunned when they heard this. Hegemon Kangxian's name was as good as thunder. Even though he had only debuted for half a year, he had already shaken the Great Tang. After all, the record of defeating Hegemon and Berserk Warrior in a row was there. He was definitely the supreme powerhouse among the young generation of the Great Tang cultivation sector. Zhong Kixin said incredulously, "Fellow Taoist Wu, you're not mistaken, are you?" He was somewhat in disbelief. A figure like the three kings of Fengdu was simply a legendary existence to them. Zhong Tianhao on the side also had a suspicious look on his face. He wasn't doubting the grey-clothed old man. The main reason was that Hegemon Kangxian's name was too loud. That was an existence that was comparable to the four masters of the imperial capital, and no one in the entire human Great Tang cultivation realm knew about it. HMPH. To be able to lightly injure old me with a single blade in the young generation of the Great Tang cultivation world. Besides the four masters of the imperial capital, the three kings of Fengdu, and the 7 warriors of the Great Tang, who else can there be? Among these 14 young supreme beings, the imperial capital 4G and the Great Tang 7 warriors are all known to me. Only the Fengdu 3 kings have been out for a short while, and apart from the cultivators of Fengdu City, very few people are clear about what he looks like, and the corpse-catching sect has been closed for 100 years, so it's very likely that this person is Overlord Kangxian. The grey-clothed old man snorted coldly. "Listening to you, fellow Taoist, it is indeed possible. Rumor has it that Hegemon Kangxian is young, a little younger than the 7 heroes of the Great Tang dynasty, and is also the only one amongst these 14 young supreme beings who hasn't formed a Dan, and this youth in front of us does fit the bill." Zhong Kixin couldn't help but be a little convinced when he heard this. If it's really this person, then this water spirit fruit. Zhong Tianhao sniffed. His face couldn't help but look very ugly. He naturally knew the strength of Overlord Kangxian. He was so powerful a year ago. Now that a year had passed, who knew how much it had enhanced? Just by looking at that day, Kangxian made the grey-clothed old man at the 8th level of the Jidan stage spit out blood. With a single slash, he knew how powerful he was. Well, don't worry, there is still the Zhou family and the Shenta family around. It's hard for him to beat 4 hands with 2 fists alone. We'll see what we can do when the time comes. The grey-clothed old man pondered for a moment and said, "Fellow Taoist Wu has a point." Zhong Kixin also nodded. Knowing Kangxian's identity, he didn't dare to be careless anymore. The various forces present had different minds, and between their deliberative thoughts, Shen Tefeng finally arrived in front of Kangxian and the others. "Her, Miss Shui Rhythm, we meet again. It's really fate." Shen Tefeng looked at the delicate and moving delicate body in front of him. A hint of fire flashed in the depths of his eyes, and said with a smile on his face, "Bullshit fate. It's ape dung." On the side, Kangxian couldn't help but slander in his heart. Yun Shuiru gave him a disgusted look, and said with an indifferent expression, "What Duke Feng means is that I'm fated with everyone here." Such blunt words caused Shen Tefeng to be slightly embarrassed for a moment. Then his gaze could not help but be gloomy as he looked towards Kangxian on the side and said, grimly, "Kid, who are you? Why don't you salute when you see this young man? This young man is the Demon Yuan City First World Shen Tu." Shen Tefeng's words hadn't even finished. Kangxian over there had already become unable to hold back, and an indifferent and mocking voice came out of his mouth. "I didn't expect Shen Tiji to have a brother like you. What a disappointment. The next time I see him, I will remind him to discipline you properly," Kangxian said coldly. In front of him, this Shen Tefeng's strength was good. He had already formed the 7th turn purple Dan, but his character appeared to be too proud and arrogant. This kind of person would have died in the cultivation world long ago if he didn't have a family to protect him. Compared to Shen Tiji, this brother is really unbearable to compare. What arrogant and domineering words. Listening to Kangxian's words, the surrounding crowd was stunned. Shen Tefeng's face was even more difficult to see. No one knew that Shen Tiji was his heart demon. No one in the entire Shen Te family dared to mention this name in front of him. Kangxian's words left the crowd of people in the distance dumbfounded. Daring to say such face-slapping words in front of Shen Tefeng was the first time they had seen it. Moreover, listening to Kangxian's politeness, It seemed that he didn't even care about Mad Warrior Shen Tuji, which couldn't help but surprise the crowd. On the contrary, it was the Zhou family, Zhong family, and the others in the distance who secretly nodded their heads, knowing that they had guessed correctly, and that only the hegemony king, who was the three kings of Fengdu, would dare to say such words. However, after truly corroborating Kang Qian's identity, there was still a surge of shock in the bottom of their hearts. After all, it was the first time they had seen Kang Qian, the legendary hegemon, who was one of the three kings of Fengdu. In the great Tang cultivation realm, the reputation of the three kings of Fengdu was very loud, which was mainly attributed to the battle at Fengdu City's martial arts arena. Among them, it was hegemon Kang Qian's reputation that was more prosperous. After all, Kang Qian's horrific record of defeating hegemon and berserker in a row was an ironclad fact, whereas the two Corpse Heaven and Corpse Earth brothers were more tragic, with one of them losing under Zhao Wuji, and the other one being made to look like a dusty mess by Kang Qian.